Sapphire just managed to pull up enough to avoid the hit breaking her neck and impact. The hit still knocked the air out of her though, and she felt ribs cracking. It was a deep disorientating pain, and she wondered what had just happened to her. She was not that high in the air and would be dropping fast. The thing that had hit her clung to her, and was shaking her by the shoulders, shouting at her. It seemed very distraught. What a weird language, she thought, before snapping back to her senses and drawing breath again. It hurt like hell, her cracked or broken ribs protesting loudly. Her training took over. Any real flyer knew what to do when things went wrong. She tucked in her wings and used her tail to counter the spin they were currently in. She was heading straight for the ground, and it was a lot closer than she had remembered. Cursing the second she had lost in the days, she flared her wings, trying desperately to pull up. The thing clinging to her sure didn't help. Its weight was way too far forward. Damn thing. It was going to get them both killed. Though if she was without wings in a crash dive, she would probably be clinging to the nearest thing that could fly too. That was a little comfort though. She had been too slow to react, and the creature wouldn't move, despite being told they were going to hit. At least the clinging creature will hit first. Tom admitted things weren't going great on his little trip. He'd been kidnapped, gored in the gut, poisoned, shaken like a dog's toy, used as an air-to-air missile, and was now heading for the ground clinging to a half-unconscious dragon-looking thing. It had at least begun to wake up around halfway down. The impact must have knocked it out, and it was now seemingly fighting not to turn into a pancake on impact with the ground. He couldn't see how well that particular battle was going from his current position, grabbing onto his neck, hanging on for dear life. He soon got his answer as he slammed into the ground back first. The hit knocked the breath out of him again. They rolled across the ground, dirt and moss flying everywhere, and he heard bone cracking and screaming. He had added his own voice to the choir when his right shoulder was knocked out of his joint, causing him to finally lose his grip on his ad hoc transportation method. He gasped for air as the world began to blacken around the edges. As Sapphire came to, she was on the ground, and the pain was immense. She looked up to see Esmeralda looking worried at her with a grimace on her face. No, that is not supposed to look like that. Ugh. The old Huntress shuddered looking at her. When she tried to move, she was met with sharp pain from her right wing, her leg protesting the movement, in addition to her badly bruised chest. Forcing herself to sit up with a grunt, she expected the damage. Her right wing was utterly broken, with pieces of bone sticking out, a torn membrane, and several broken digits. Oh no, she thought to herself, her spirit sinking. She would be grounded for weeks at best, if not months. And when she looked down, she found her shin broken too. Apparently it had gotten stuck at an awkward angle during the tumble, so she wouldn't be walking either. Marvellous. But at least she was alive, and that had been quite the fall. She looked over to the crash site to see the thing sitting up with one of his hands in the air, seemingly not ready to pick another fight. Damn it, she cursed to herself. She would have loved to pay him back for a busted wing, or perhaps have one of the others do it for her, given her current condition and all. As Jackalope came over and proclaimed, "Ouch, you don't look brilliant," all she could do was stare at her, with a sort of indignant rage reserved for people who didn't know when to shut up. "How many got away?" she demanded, trying to switch the subject away from her current predicament. "2. Not all bad things considered. We got the one that so graciously knocks you out of the sky." Jackalope seemed quite pleased with the result. "Yay, I have been avenged," Sapphire replied, not a grain of amusement in her tone. Tom was not sure if his situation had improved much following the crash. He was down one gun and his knife. He hurt like hell, and was now staring at a drawn bow. He had raised his hands the best he could despite his less than fully functional arm, and he was sitting up to look at his captors. Saviors? They were dragon-like for sure, but no taller than him. Well, with the horns maybe a little. They were humanoid just like him, but with wings on their backs. They were all a whitish silver colour, varying a little between them, with horns that were dark blue, almost metallic looking, with a lighter blue to turquoise-ish colour running down their neck and chest, along with what seemed like interlocking plates. Big scales, he guessed. They were wearing armour of some description, though it looked more for show than practicality. The armour consisted of what he could best describe as a tiara, a breastplate that stopped above the midriff for some reason, greaves, gauntlets, and a skirt of what looked like thick, dark blue leather plates. They all carried bows and some sort of big dagger or short sword. The metal part of the armour had a white enamel-like finish to it, with copper, silver, or gold inlay, depending on the person. It was all very intricately made too. All in all, they looked quite dapper. They were very similarly built, but more like an Olympic runner than anything else. It didn't hurt, of course, that they even looked quite feminine. They just screamed, high-pitched flying. The one looking at him and not pointing the bow at him spoke in a guttural tone. It almost sounded like Russian, he thought. The voice was feminine too, though. As he pondered if he had just been rescued or captured by flying dragon Amazons, it dawned on him he was being held at bow point by people he couldn't talk with, and that looked decidedly militaristic, if stylish. Well, this complicates things. As he pointed at his ear with his good hand, he shook his head. I can't understand you. The one talking just face-palmed, followed by throwing her head up towards the sky and letting out a long sigh, seemingly about as pleased with the situation as Tom was. She, turned to talk to the injured one. It can't speak properly, Dakota sighed, turning to Sapphire. How are you feeling, Saf? To be honest, not brilliant, and I'm not going to be flying or walking anytime soon, Sapphire replied, trying not to sound defeated. Accidents happen. To be honest, I haven't seen that maneuver before. It was quite well done, the way it used the tree to hide its trap, Dakota said, sounding as if she was already working to use the new discovery to her advantage. I'm glad you found my crash educational, Sapphire replied indignantly, as she further inspected the damage. It would need to be set and braced before the natural healing started, and they were quite far from home. It hurt like hell. I think that weird thing could help. It seems to know some magic. Let's try and find out, Dakota replied, looking back at the thing that had downed her best flyer. As Tom looked around, he had counted 5 dragon people. He really needed a better name for them than that, he thought. The one he had ridden on his way down did not look great. His wing was definitely busted, and his leg was fucked too. He wondered what they were going to do now. One of them turned and looked at him. He figured it was probably the leader, since it had more gold worked into its armor than the others. It pointed at the injured one with a very demanding look in its eyes, and muttered a single word in his language. Tom took it to mean fix, or something like that. He hadn't brought anything besides a basic first aid kit, but hey, the least he could do was try and help. He nodded, got up, and tried to walk over to a nearby tree, only to be stopped by the one still pointing a bow at him. He pointed at his shoulder and made a grimace as if to indicate pain, then at the tree. The dragon thing looked quizzical, tilting his head before backing away a bit. Tom had tried the procedure before. That didn't make it any more comfortable, of course. Reseating the shoulder by slamming it into a tree was painful, but on the 3rd try, he had managed it. With a loud pop and a shout of satisfying pain, he regained the use of his arm, at least somewhat. His guard had seemed alarmed by the act, and had moved to stop him right as the joint slipped back into place, reaching out his hand but seeming to realize what had been done, and quickly retreating, drawing his bow again. Tom stumbled over to the wounded dragonette? Yes, dragonette. Not quite a dragon, but pretty close. It would do for now, anyway. He removed his backpack, taking out the first aid kit, and set to work. I don't think he knows healing magic. That looks like healer supplies, and he seemed to be quite hurt too. Esmeralda's input was, as always, appreciated, if often quite obvious. Still better than nothing, and the materials looked to be of excellent quality. As the creature worked, his fingers seemed so soft and delicate. They were warm too. If not for the pain, then it would actually be quite comfortable. It didn't have claws either, which was nice. But it was still only healing supplies, so Dakota would have to lend a hand. Even if she wasn't that capable of a healer, she could at the very least close a wound to prevent infection. It was at times like these, Sapphire regretted Nanook had gotten too old to go on hunts. Her spellcraft would have been greatly appreciated. Looking at the thing currently working on the wing, she realized his clothes were soaked through with blood. The green and black cloth he'd worn had done well to hide the fact. If you want to question this thing, he needs attention. That doesn't look good. I'll live for now. Also, I think it's bleeding red? Tom was in the middle of working out a splint for one of the small digits that ran down the wing, when suddenly he was pulled away and laid down on his back. Not quite sure what to make of the situation, he raised his hands again, only to have his shirt lifted, revealing the damage to his gut. He struggled to get a closer look at the damage. It looked quite bad. He thought it could have been worse, though. The creature's claws had almost managed to enclose his wrist when carrying him, and so had only made scratch marks and some small punctures, rather than digging in. His vest had also taken some of the pounding, even if the stinger had hit below it, because why not? At least his captor seemed interested in his survival, which was nice. Seemingly quite worried by the damage, one had begun applying pressure to the wound. A surprisingly large amount of pressure at that. Another brought him his first aid kit. He grabbed the kit and got out the disinfectant and applied it liberally to the wounds. When he had tried to apply bandages, though, they stopped him. The leader had come over and began a low muttering chant. His eyes widened, and his lips curled into a smile. He practically screamed inside himself. They got magic! Oh, hell yeah! It only seemed to knit together the skin, though. The pain was still there. Still, very useful against infections, he thought to himself. As he got out with a groan, his guard drew their bow again. He really needed to make friends here, he thought. These were the first people he had met, after all, and he certainly wasn't in fighting shape. Stumbling back over to his backpack, his thighs still hurting like hell, he got out some trail mix and jerky, and offered it to the one guarding him. It seemed the youngest, with mostly copper inlay in his armor, and his leathery skin being closer to white than silver. Food, he tried, watching as it lowered his bow and carefully took the items, looking at them quizzically. Tom got out another bag of trail mix and opened it, pouring out a few pieces of nuts and dried berries into his hand, and eating them. The dragonette followed suit, inspecting the bag closely. It looked quite pleased by the taste, once it got the contents out, though the bag appeared to be even more interesting. Two of the others had come over to try the snacks immediately. That was a good sign. At least he had something to barter with on him. He took out a pair of painkillers to take the edge off, and offered one to the wounded dragonette, along with some water. It seemed more interested in the bottle, though, saying something in its alien tongue and bowing her head. He showed himself eating the painkiller, and it followed suit, washing it down with some of the water. The leader had continued to work on his injuries, sparing a squinted look at Tom every now and again, like she was trying to figure him out. Hey girls, he's got food, nuts and berries I think. Don't recognize any of them though, and this looks like dried meat of some kind. As Fengi took a bite of the strange meat, her eyes flared. How does that taste so good? The childlike wonder of her voice got the attention of Jackalope and Esmeralda, drawing them over to try the snacks. Sapphire was left sitting there, pouting, while Dakota worked, wing broken, leg broken, and now the others were harvesting the reward from the guy she had practically saved? Not fair. There was wide consensus that this guy knew how to make snacks, that was for sure. Next he took out a dark green bottle, walked over to Sapphire, and gave it to her. Thank you, she responded, bowing her head slightly and looking at the strange bottle. It was not metal or glass, that was certain, but she had no idea what it was. It didn't look like skin or leather either, at least none that she knew. Was it medicine? The stranger reached over and unscrewed the top for her. No cork. He gave her a small bead, and then he took a similar one himself, looking at her inspectantly. That must be medicine. She ate the thing and drank. It was nice clean water, and the bead didn't taste of anything. Strange medicine, she thought. That stuff was usually horrid, though the bottle was even more interesting. He then pulled out some sort of rectangular object, wrapped in a very thin, strange material. It was very colourful too, almost like silk. As he ripped it open, he revealed a small bar of what looked like grains stuck together. She nearly winced. It had looked so pretty. He handed it to her and made an eating motion. As she put it in her mouth, it was nice and crunchy. And sweet. There was honey in it. Normally that would be reserved for feasts and celebrations, and he just had some in his pack and gave it away? Did he even know what that was worth? Perhaps he really was grateful for the rather ungraceful ride down. He's got honey too!